The strangest thing about fate is that it never knocks on the front door. Snow drifted through the narrow Brooklyn street like torn pieces of white paper, swirling beneath streetlights that cast pale circles across the frozen sidewalk. Most people hurried past with their heads down and their hands buried deep inside their coats, focused only on getting home before the storm grew worse. Tessa Morgan was no different. Her boots crunched through 3 inches of fresh snow as she left the community library after another late shift, her scarf wrapped high against the bitter January wind. The neighborhood looked softer beneath the snow, almost beautiful. The cracked sidewalks disappeared. The graffiti faded beneath white blankets. Even the aging apartment building seemed quieter. Tessa adjusted the strap of her canvas bag and quickened her pace. The forecast had warned of another 4 inches before midnight. Then she heard it, a faint sound. She stopped. The noise came again, a small whine, fragile, desperate. Her eyes scanned the street until she spotted movement beneath a bus stop bench across the road, a dog. Small, thin, shivering so hard its entire body trembled. Snow clung to its fur. Most people never even slowed down. A man in a business coat walked past. A couple crossed the street. Nobody stopped. Tessa hesitated only long enough to glance at the traffic light before hurrying across. The dog flinched when she approached. Its ribs showed beneath dirty fur. One paw was tucked beneath its body. Around its neck hung an old leather collar worn nearly smooth by time. "Hey there," she whispered, crouching in the snow. "You picked a rough night to be outside." The dog backed away another few inches but lacked the strength to run. Tessa slowly removed her gloves. Her fingers immediately burned from the cold. She reached into her bag and pulled out the turkey sandwich she had planned to eat for dinner. Piece by piece, she offered it forward. The dog watched her carefully before finally taking a bite. Then another, then another. The wind howled down the street. Snowflakes gathered in her hair. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Eventually the dog allowed her to drape her scarf around its body. "There you go," she said softly. "That's better." What Tessa didn't know was that less than 50 yards away, a black SUV sat motionless along the curb. Inside, a man watched through tinted glass. Rafael Marino rarely paid attention to strangers. His days were consumed by meetings, negotiations, responsibilities, and decisions that affected hundreds of lives. Yet he had been sitting there for nearly 20 minutes, watching a woman freeze in the middle of a snowstorm for an animal everyone else ignored. Something about the scene felt impossible to look away from. The dog finally stepped forward and rested its head against Tessa's knee. She smiled, a small tired smile that carried more warmth than the entire city around her. Raphael's expression changed almost imperceptibly. His eyes moved toward the old leather collar around the dog's neck. For a moment he forgot the storm, forgot the driver waiting for instructions, forgot everything except that collar. A memory surfaced so suddenly it felt like a punch to the chest. 12 years vanished in an instant. Then the traffic light changed. Tessa carefully lifted the dog into her arms and began walking toward a nearby veterinary clinic that offered emergency overnight boarding. She never noticed the SUV pulling away from the curb. She never noticed the dark eyes following her through the snow, and she certainly never imagined that a single act of kindness on a freezing winter night had just altered the course of 2 lives forever. Because as the SUV disappeared into the storm, Rafael Marino gave a simple order that surprised even himself. Find out who she is. Some people notice when they are being watched. Others feel it long before they can explain it. 3 days after the snowstorm, Brooklyn had settled into its usual rhythm. The sidewalks were wet instead of white. Dirty piles of melting snow lined the curbs. The city seemed eager to forget the storm had ever happened. Tessa Morgan could not. Every morning before work she stopped at the veterinary clinic. The dog was recovering well. The staff had cleaned him up, treated his injured paw, and discovered that he was older than anyone first assumed. Nobody had come looking for him. Nobody had claimed him. Which meant he spent most of his afternoons waiting near the front window for the one person who visited every day. Tessa smiled when she saw him wagging his tail. "You are looking much better than I am," she joked one morning as she scratched behind his ears. The receptionist laughed. "You know, if nobody adopts him soon, I think he already made the decision himself." Tessa looked down at the dog. "Do not get any ideas." The dog immediately leaned against her leg. Unfortunately, he already had. What Tessa did not know was that someone else had been checking on the dog too, not inside the clinic, never inside, across the street, inside a parked vehicle, always from a distance. Rafael Marino was not a man known for changing routines. Yet twice in the past week his driver had found himself parked outside a veterinary clinic with no explanation. Raphael rarely spoke during those visits. He simply watched. Sometimes the woman arrived carrying coffee, sometimes she arrived carrying treats. Once she spent 20 minutes reading aloud while the dog slept beside her. It made absolutely no sense to him, yet he kept returning. By Thursday afternoon, Tessa began noticing small things. The same black SUV parked near the library. The same vehicle near the grocery store, once outside the coffee shop where she bought breakfast. Maybe it was coincidence. New York was full of black SUVs, but by Saturday coincidence felt harder to believe. She stepped out of the library shortly after sunset. The winter sky had already turned dark. Streetlights reflected across puddles left behind by melting snow. Halfway down the block she stopped. Across the street sat the SUV again, motionless, waiting. A strange chill moved through her chest. The vehicle looked familiar. She could not explain why. She crossed the street, the SUV remained still. One step, then another, then another. Suddenly the passenger window lowered several inches. Not enough to reveal much, just enough to reveal a man seated inside. Dark coat, calm expression. Eyes that seemed entirely focused on her. Tessa froze. For a second neither spoke. City noise faded into the background. "Can I help you?" she finally asked. The man studied her for a moment before answering. "That depends." His voice was low and controlled. "Can I help you?" The question caught her off guard. "I do not even know who you are." A faint smile appeared. Not warm, not cold. Difficult to read. "That is fair." Before she could respond, the traffic light changed. Cars moved between them. The window rolled up. Seconds later, the SUV merged into traffic and disappeared. Tessa stood motionless on the sidewalk, confused, irritated, curious. The encounter lasted less than a minute, yet it stayed with her the entire evening. Later that night, after returning to her apartment, she discovered an envelope slipped beneath her front door. No name, no address, nothing except a single photograph. It showed her sitting beside the dog at the clinic window 3 days earlier. On the back, someone had written 6 words in neat black ink. "You should be more careful, Tessa." By Sunday morning, the photograph had already changed the way Tessa looked at the world. Every reflection in a store window made her glance twice. Every parked vehicle seemed suspicious. Every unfamiliar face lingered in her memory longer than it should have. The picture sat on her kitchen table beside a cold cup of coffee. She had studied it at least 20 times since the night before. The angle was wrong for a casual snapshot. Whoever took it had been watching carefully, close enough to capture her expression, far enough away to remain unseen. The message on the back bothered her even more. It did not sound like a threat, it sounded like a warning. That was somehow worse. The dog greeted her excitedly when she arrived at the clinic later the morning. His injured paw was healing well. His fur looked cleaner, healthier. The veterinarian smiled as she entered. "Your friend is getting stronger every day." Tessa knelt beside him. "Good, because somebody around here clearly makes terrible decisions." The dog immediately leaned against her shoulder. The veterinarian laughed. "Speaking of decisions, are you finally going to adopt him?" Tessa hesitated. Her apartment barely fit one person. Her savings account was almost non-existent. Her car needed repairs. The logical answer was no. Unfortunately, logic had never been very effective around sad animals. "I am thinking about it," she admitted. "That means yes." The veterinarian smiled knowingly. Tessa looked down at the old leather collar. The worn material seemed strangely expensive compared to the rest of the dog. She had noticed it before, but never paid much attention. Today was different. "Did you ever find any information about the collar?" she asked. The veterinarian shook her head. "Nothing useful. It is old, very old. Whoever owned him years ago clearly took good care of him." Before Tessa could respond, the clinic door opened. Cold air swept inside. She looked up automatically. For a moment, her heart stopped. The man from the SUV stood near the entrance. Dark wool coat, calm posture, the same unreadable eyes. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the dog. Silence stretched between them. The receptionist greeted him first. "Can I help you?" The man stepped forward. "I am here to make a donation." The receptionist blinked. "A donation?" He nodded. "For animal care. Use it wherever it is needed." He handed over an envelope. Her eyes widened immediately. "Sir, this is... use it well." He never finished the sentence. His gaze shifted briefly toward Tessa, not long enough to feel rude, long enough to feel intentional. Then he turned and walked out. The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds. The receptionist stared after him. "Well, what?" Tessa asked. The receptionist looked stunned. That might be the largest donation this clinic has ever received. Tessa stepped toward the window just in time to see the black SUV disappear into traffic. A strange feeling settled in her chest. Confusion mixed with curiosity. Nothing about the man made sense. Later that evening, she attended a neighborhood meeting at the community center. Nearly every seat was filled. Residents crowded together beneath fluorescent lights, while a representative from a development company stood near a projector screen. Images of luxury apartments flashed across the wall, modern buildings, rooftop gardens, expensive views. The presenter represents opportunity. A few people nodded, most did not. Tessa listened quietly from the third row. Then the next slide appeared, a map. Her stomach tightened. Entire blocks were highlighted in red, including her building, including the library, including dozens of small businesses. "What happens to the current residents?" someone asked. The presenter maintained his smile. "Relocation assistance will be available." The room immediately filled with unhappy voices. Tessa glanced around. Anger. Nobody seemed convinced. As the meeting ended, she stepped outside into the cold evening air. Snowflakes drifted lazily beneath the streetlights. Then she noticed something waiting across the street, the black SUV. Motionless, watching, and for the first time something even more unsettling. The mysterious man was not following only her. He was watching the neighborhood too. The difference between coincidence and intention is usually invisible until the moment it is not. For the next several days, the image of the black SUV remained in Tessa's mind. She tried convincing herself she was imagining patterns that did not exist. Brooklyn was full of expensive vehicles. Wealthy investors attended community meetings all the time, yet every explanation felt weaker than the last. Tuesday arrived gray and cold. Low clouds hung over the city like a heavy blanket. Tessa spent most of the afternoon organizing donated books at the library while conversations about the proposed development project drifted through the building. Some residents were angry, others were scared. Many simply felt powerless. The uncertainty seemed to touch everyone. Around 4 o'clock, an elderly woman approached the front desk carrying a stack of novels. Mrs. Donnelly lived 3 blocks away and had visited the library almost every week for years. Today she looked exhausted. "Have you heard anything new?" she asked quietly. Tessa already knew what she meant. "Nothing official," Mrs. Donnelly sighed. "My husband and I have lived in that apartment for 38 years. The words carried a weight that lingered long after the woman walked away. By closing time, a steady rain had replaced the snow. Streetlights reflected across wet pavement as Tessa locked the library doors and started home. The neighborhood felt different lately. Tense, restless, like everyone was waiting for something they could not see yet. Halfway down the block, she noticed flashing lights ahead. Not emergency lights, construction vehicles. Several large trucks were parked near a vacant building scheduled for demolition. Workers moved equipment through the rain while pedestrians squeezed along the narrow sidewalk. Tessa stepped around a puddle and continued forward. Then a loud metallic sound echoed through the street. Instinctively, heads turned. One of the temporary barricades surrounding the work area had shifted. Wind pushed against a stack of unsecured materials nearby. Workers shouted to one another. For a brief second, confusion spread through the crowded sidewalk. Tessa slowed. Something felt wrong. Before she could fully process it, a hand closed gently around her, unexpected. She was guided backward 2 steps. Nothing more, nothing less. A moment later, part of the temporary structure near the sidewalk gave way and landed exactly where she had been standing. Gasps filled the air. Workers rushed forward. Nobody appeared injured. The entire incident lasted only seconds. Tessa's heartbeat hammered in her ears. She turned immediately toward the person beside her. Rafael Marina released her arm and stepped back. Rain dotted the shoulders of his dark coat. His expression remained calm despite the commotion surrounding them. "You," she said. It was all she managed. He glanced toward the construction area before looking back at her. "You should pay more attention to your surroundings." Irritation quickly replaced shock. "That sounds familiar." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Does it? Are you following me?" she asked. Direct, frustrated, honest. Several raindrops slid from her hair as she stared at him. Raphael studied her for a moment. No, the answer came too quickly. That was not convincing. For the first time, something almost amused appeared in his eyes. Fair enough, neither moved. Traffic rolled past behind them. Rain tapped softly against metal and glass. Tessa realized this was the closest she had ever been to him. He looked older than she first thought, not old. Just carrying the kind of composure that came from responsibility rather than age. "Who are you?" she asked. He seemed to consider the question carefully. "Someone trying to prevent avoidable mistakes. That is not an answer. It is the only one you are getting tonight." Before she could stop him, he turned and began walking toward a waiting vehicle parked farther down the street. Tessa watched him leave. Then something caught her attention. One of the construction supervisors was arguing with a man near the trucks. The supervisor appeared unusually nervous, unusually eager to leave. What Tessa did not know was that less than a mile away, several important documents connected to the redevelopment project had quietly disappeared from a corporate office earlier that afternoon, and at that exact moment, Rafael Marino already knew far more about the neighborhood's future than anyone attending those community meetings. The real question was why he seemed determined to keep Tessa out of its path. Trust is rarely broken all at once. More often, it erodes one unanswered question at a time. By the end of that week, Tessa had reached a simple conclusion. Rafael Marino knew far more than he admitted, and every encounter seemed designed to leave her with even more questions than before. The realization irritated her more than she wanted to admit. On Friday afternoon, she finally completed the paperwork to adopt the dog. The veterinarian smiled as she signed the last page. "Congratulations," she said. "Looks like he officially belongs to you now." Tessa looked down at the dog resting beside her chair. "I think he made that decision weeks ago." The dog responded by placing his head on her shoe. Outside, a light snow drifted through the grey afternoon sky. Winter had returned. By the time she left the clinic carrying a bag of supplies and a leash, the streets had already begun turning white again. For the first time in days, she felt something close to happiness. It lasted exactly 20 minutes. She was crossing a small plaza near the subway entrance when she noticed him. Rafael stood beside a black sedan parked near the curb. No driver visible, no security visible, just him, waiting. The moment their eyes met, irritation flared inside her chest. She changed direction immediately. He stepped forward. She stopped. "Do not what? Do not say my name like we are friends." The wind swept loose snow across the pavement between them. Rafael studied her expression carefully. "You seem upset." "You photographed me. Someone did." "Fair point." The answer only made her more frustrated. "Do you hear yourself?" she asked. "Every conversation with you feels like half of a conversation. That is because you only know half the story." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Silence followed. Tessa folded her arms. "Then tell me the other half." For a moment, something changed in his expression. Not weakness, not hesitation, something closer to regret. Then it vanished. "I cannot. You will not." He did not argue. That bothered her even more. Snowflakes drifted between them. The city continued moving around them. Car horns, distant sirens, footsteps. Life continuing while the strange tension between them remained perfectly still. "Why are you following me?" she asked quietly. "You are everywhere. Maybe you are looking for me." The comment earned him the first genuine glare he had seen from her. Unexpectedly, it almost made him smile. "This is not funny." "No," he agreed. "It is not." His voice carried a seriousness that immediately changed the atmosphere. Tessa noticed it too. "Then explain it." Rafael looked toward the dog sitting calmly beside her. The old leather collar peeked through thick fur. His eyes lingered there for only a second. "Before you remind me of someone." The answer landed softly. No dramatic revelation, no explanation, just 6 words. Tessa stared at him. "Who?" He looked away first. "Someone I lost a long time ago." Before she could ask another question, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. The shift in his expression was subtle but immediate. Whatever message appeared there clearly mattered. "I have to go." Tessa laughed in disbelief. "Of course you do." Raphael slipped the phone back into his coat. "Be careful tonight. There it is again." "What?" That warning. Her eyes narrowed. "You keep acting like something is about to happen." For the first time, he did not answer. The silence itself felt like an answer. Tessa watched him disappear into the falling snow. Beside her, the dog suddenly stood and stared in the same direction Raphael had gone. His ears lifted, his body became perfectly still, as if he recognized something, or someone. And for the first time, a troubling thought entered Tessa's mind. What if Rafael Marino had never been following her at all? What if, from the very beginning, his attention had been fixed on the dog? The human mind has a remarkable talent for filling empty spaces with the wrong answers. By Monday morning, Tessa had convinced herself she finally understood the situation. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to stop wondering. Rafael Marino was not interested in her. He was interested in the dog. The realization should have been comforting. Instead, it left behind a strange disappointment she refused to examine too closely. Outside her apartment window, fresh snow covered the rooftops again. The city looked clean from a distance, quiet, honest. Up close, it felt anything but. The redevelopment project dominated every conversation in the neighborhood. Flyers appeared on doors. Community meetings filled quickly. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some residents claimed the project was already approved. Others insisted legal challenges were coming. Nobody seemed certain. Tessa focused on what she could control: work, the dog, daily routines, simpler things. For 3 days she did not see Raphael. No black SUV. No mysterious appearances. No warnings. Nothing. The absence should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt noticeable. On Thursday evening, the library hosted a community information session. Folding chairs filled the main reading area. Coffee steamed from paper cups. Concerned voices echoed between bookshelves. Tessa helped arrange materials near the entrance while residents discussed property values, relocation plans, and rising rents. An attorney from a non-profit housing organization answered questions at the front of the room. Everything seemed normal until a man entered carrying a stack of official-looking folders. He introduced himself as a representative of the development company. His smile appeared practiced, polished, professional. He handed out information packets and spoke confidently about progress, opportunity, and modernization, yet something felt off. Several residents exchanged uneasy glances. The answers sounded rehearsed, vague. Whenever difficult questions arose, the representative redirected the conversation instead of addressing it directly. Tessa noticed it immediately, so did everyone else. By the time the meeting ended, frustration lingered throughout the room. Outside, snow drifted beneath the streetlights. Residents gathered in small groups discussing what they had heard. Tessa stepped onto the sidewalk with the dog trotting beside her. She had barely walked half a block before she heard a familiar voice behind her. "You should not trust him." She stopped instantly. Raphael stood near a parked sedan. No dramatic entrance, no surprise vehicle emerging from the darkness, just Raphael, calm as always. Tessa sighed. I was beginning to enjoy the silence. A faint smile touched his face. "You are welcome. You disappeared." The words escaped before she could stop them. Raphael seemed mildly surprised. "Was I supposed to report my whereabouts?" "That is not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Tessa immediately regretted the direction of the conversation. She tightened her grip on the leash. Nothing. Snow settled across the shoulders of his dark coat. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Raphael nodded toward the community center behind her. "The man inside is not telling the truth. You know that how?" "Because I know who employs him." Tessa crossed her arms. "There it is again." "What? You always know things." Raphael looked away briefly toward the glowing windows of the library. "Sometimes knowing things is not an advantage." The answer sounded more personal than he intended, Tessa noticed. Before she could press further, the dog suddenly tugged at the leash and moved toward Raphael, not cautiously, not fearfully, familiar. The animal stopped directly beside him and sat down. Raphael froze. For the briefest moment, his carefully controlled expression cracked. Something raw flashed behind his eyes before disappearing again. Tessa saw it. She did not understand it, but she saw it. The dog leaned gently against Raphael's leg. Neither moved. Snow drifted silently around them. Then Raphael stepped back. The moment vanished. "Go home, Tessa." His voice sounded different now. "Quita." "Why?" she asked. He looked at the dog one final time. "Because the closer you get to this situation, the harder it becomes to walk away." Then he turned and left without another word. Tessa watched him disappear into the falling snow. She thought she understood the story now. She thought the dog was the reason. Unfortunately for her, she was still looking at the wrong piece of the puzzle. Because less than 24 hours later, a discovery hidden in that worn leather collar would change everything she believed she knew. Some truths spend years buried in silence before finding their way back into the light. The discovery happened on a Saturday morning entirely by accident. Tessa was sitting on the floor of her apartment with the dog stretched comfortably beside her. Winter sunlight filtered through the window, turning the room pale gold. It was the kind of quiet morning she had not experienced in weeks. No community meetings, no mysterious warnings, no unexpected encounters. Just coffee, an old blanket, and a dog who had somehow become family. While brushing his fur, her fingers caught on the worn leather collar again. She had noticed the unusual stitching before, but this time something felt different. One section seemed thicker than the rest. Curiosity took over. Carefully, she examined the inside seam. Hidden beneath years of wear was a tiny metal compartment no larger than her thumb. "Well," she murmured, "that is interesting." The compartment resisted at first, but eventually it opened. Inside sat a folded piece of paper by a thin plastic sleeve. Tessa stared for several seconds before carefully removing it. The paper looked ancient, yellowed with age, fragile. She unfolded it slowly. A child's handwriting appeared across the page. The letters were uneven, innocent, the kind of writing that belonged to someone very young. The note read, "If you find Charlie, please bring him home. He gets scared during storms. Love, Sophia." Beneath the message was a phone number, long disconnected, and a simple drawing of a smiling dog. Tessa felt an unexpected ache in her chest. Whoever Sophia was, she had clearly loved this animal very much. A few hours later, unable to stop thinking about it, she brought the note to the veterinary clinic. The veterinarian adjusted his glasses as he examined the paper. "This is old," he said quietly. "Very old." "Can you tell how old?" Tessa asked. He looked at the faded ink. "Maybe 10 years, maybe more." The receptionist leaned closer. "Poor kid." Tessa nodded. "I wish I knew what happened." At that exact moment, the clinic door opened. The familiar sound immediately pulled her attention toward the entrance. Rafael Marino stepped inside. For the first time, he was not across the street, not hidden behind glass, not observing from a distance. He was here, directly in front of her. The entire room seemed to grow still. The receptionist recognized him instantly. The veterinarian did too. Neither said a word. Tessa noticed the subtle change in atmosphere immediately. Raphael's gaze moved toward the dog, then toward the paper in her hand. His expression froze. The color drained from his face so quickly it startled her. "Where did you get that?" he asked. The question emerged almost as a whisper. Tessa held up the note. It was hidden inside the collar. Raphael crossed the room in 2 steps, not rushed, not aggressive, focused. His eyes never left the paper. When she handed it to him, his hands trembled, only slightly, but enough. He stared at the childish handwriting, then at the drawing, then at the name. Sophia. Silence filled the clinic, heavy, emotional, impossible to ignore. Tessa had never seen him like this. The controlled composure she associated with him seemed to disappear completely. "You know her," she said softly. Raphael closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them again, something had changed. The walls he normally kept around himself no longer looked quite as strong. "She was my sister." The words landed like a shockwave. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. Even the dog remained strangely still. Tessa stared at him. Her mind struggled to catch up. "Your sister?" Raphael nodded once, and Charlie was her dog. Every strange encounter, every warning, every unexplained appearance, every unanswered question, pieces began falling into place. The dog had never been random. The collar had never been random. None of it had been random. And for the first time, Tessa saw something she had never witnessed before. Grief. Not fresh grief, not loud grief. The kind that had survived for years, quiet, enduring, permanent. Then Raphael carefully folded the note and looked back at her. "There is something you deserve to know," he said. And in that moment, Tessa realized the real story had only just begun. There are wounds that heal with time, and there are wounds that simply learn how to stay quiet. Snow fell steadily outside the clinic windows as Raphael and Tessa sat across from each other in a small office normally used for consultations. Charlie rested on the floor between them, completely unaware that he had just reopened a chapter of someone's life that had been closed for more than a decade. For several moments, neither spoke. The note remained folded on the desk. The childish handwriting seemed almost impossibly small compared to the weight it carried. Finally, Raphael broke the silence. Sophia was 11 years old. His voice was calm, but something deeper moved beneath it. She loved animals more than people. Every stray cat in the neighborhood knew her. Every injured bird somehow ended up in our backyard. A faint smile appeared and disappeared just as quickly. And Charlie followed her everywhere. Tessa listened quietly. For the first time since meeting him, she was not trying to solve a mystery. "What happened?" she asked softly. Raphael looked toward the falling snow outside. "My family moved out of Brooklyn when I was young. Sophia hated leaving. The day we left, Charlie disappeared during a storm. His eyes lowered toward the dog. We searched for weeks." Tessa glanced down at Charlie. It seemed impossible. The dog lying peacefully at her feet had somehow carried 12 years of unanswered questions. "And your sister?" Raphael remained silent for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "She passed away a year later." The room seemed to grow still. Tessa felt her chest tighten. Suddenly, every strange encounter made sense. Every unexplained appearance. Every moment Raphael had stared at Charlie when he thought nobody was watching. He had not been following a dog. He had been following a memory. "That is why you were watching us," she said. Raphael nodded once. "The night you found him, I recognized the collar." Tessa remembered the snowstorm, the black SUV, the distant silhouette behind dark glass. "Why did you not tell me?" she asked. A humorless smile touched his face. "Because explaining that I spent 12 years looking for a ghost does not sound particularly reasonable." The answer should have felt strange. Instead, it felt heartbreakingly honest. Outside, snow tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the distance between them felt smaller than it ever had before. For the first time, Tessa saw Raphael not as a mysterious figure surrounded by secrets, but as someone carrying a loss he had never fully escaped. Sophia would have been happy that Charlie found someone kind, she said quietly. Raphael looked at her, really looked at her. The intensity that once felt intimidating now felt different, softer. That is exactly what scares me. Tessa frowned. What does? People like you. The answer caught her completely off guard. Raphael leaned back slightly. Most people see problems and walk away. His eyes shifted briefly toward Charlie. That night in the snow, nobody stopped except you. The room fell silent again. Not uncomfortable silence, something warmer, something more human. Then Raphael's phone vibrated. The change in atmosphere was immediate. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened, not with anger, with concern. Tessa noticed. What is wrong? Raphael slipped the phone away. Nothing. She immediately knew he was lying. That was a terrible answer. For the first time all afternoon he almost smiled, then it vanished. The redevelopment project is moving faster than expected. Tessa's stomach tightened. What does that mean? Raphael stood slowly. It means some people are becoming impatient. With what? His gaze lingered on her for a second longer than usual, with anyone standing in the way. Before she could ask another question, he looked toward the window. Across the street, partially hidden beneath falling snow, a black sedan had been parked for nearly 20 minutes. And unlike Raphael, whoever sat inside that vehicle was not watching Charlie. The places people love most are rarely the places outsiders notice. 2 days after their conversation at the clinic, the snow finally stopped. For the first time in weeks, sunlight broke through the clouds and painted Brooklyn in pale gold. Tessa spent the morning walking Charlie through streets that suddenly felt different, not because the neighborhood had changed, but because she had. Now every familiar corner seemed connected to a story she had never known existed. Every block carried echoes of Raphael's past. Around noon, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Meet me at Franklin Park, 2 o'clock. Bring Charlie. No signature was necessary. Somehow she already knew who sent it. At exactly 2 o'clock she arrived at the small neighborhood park. Children played near the swings. Elderly couples occupied benches warmed by the winter sun. Charlie trotted happily through patches of remaining snow. Raphael stood near an old maple tree at the far end of the park. Unlike their previous encounters, there was no vehicle waiting nearby, no visible distance between them, just Raphael and a paper coffee cup in his hand. You came, he said. You gave me a command disguised as an invitation. A faint smile appeared. Fair criticism. They began walking slowly through the park. Charlie wandered ahead, stopping occasionally to investigate patches of grass hidden beneath melting snow. For several minutes neither spoke. The silence felt surprisingly comfortable. Eventually Raphael nodded toward a row of aging brick buildings visible beyond the park fence. My family used to live over there. Tessa, follow everything changed. Here his voice carried no bitterness, only memory. They continued walking. Raphael pointed toward a corner grocery store that somehow survived decades of change. Then an elementary school, then a church whose bell tower still rose above the surrounding streets. Piece by piece, he showed her fragments of a life she had never seen. Sophia loved this neighborhood, he said quietly. She knew everyone. Tessa looked toward the streets surrounding the park. Suddenly she understood something she had missed before. That is why you care about the redevelopment project. Raphael glanced at her. Partly, because this is where she grew up. He nodded. And because the people being pushed out remind me of the people whose answer surprised her. Until now she had viewed Raphael through the lens of mystery. Wealth, influence, secrets. This was different, human, personal. As they reached the far side of the park, Charlie stopped abruptly beside a weathered stone bench. The dog sniffed the ground, then sat down. Raphael froze. Tessa noticed immediately. What is it? For several seconds he simply stared at the bench. Sophia used to sit there. The words barely rose above a whisper. Tessa looked at the worn stone. Nothing about it appeared remarkable, yet the expression on Raphael's face transformed it into something sacred, a place where time refused to move on. Without thinking, she sat down. After a brief hesitation, Raphael joined her. The winter sun dipped lower across the skyline. Golden light spilled across the park. Children laughed in the distance. Charlie rested at their feet. For the first time since meeting him, Tessa did not feel like she was speaking to a stranger. For the first time in many years, Raphael did not seem entirely alone. What neither of them noticed was a man standing across the street, partially hidden behind a newspaper stand. He watched the park for several minutes before making a phone call. Then he quietly walked away. Because while Raphael and Tessa were finally beginning to understand each other, someone else had just realized exactly how important she had become to him. The moment someone becomes important, the world finds new ways to make them vulnerable. The following week arrived wrapped in cold rain instead of snow. Grey clouds hung low over Brooklyn, turning afternoons into premature evenings. Tessa tried focusing on normal life. She went to work, walked Charlie, attended community meetings, yet something had shifted after her day in the park with Raphael. The mystery surrounding him had faded, replaced by something far more dangerous. Understanding, she understood him now. At least enough to see the loneliness hidden beneath the control, enough to recognize the grief he carried everywhere he went. That realization stayed with her long after they parted. On Wednesday evening, the library closed early because of the weather. Rain streaked across the windows while staff members gathered coats and umbrellas. By 6 o'clock, the building was nearly empty. Tessa finished locking a storage room and headed toward the front entrance. Charlie waited beside the desk, tail wagging lazily. Outside, the street looked deserted. Water shimmered beneath streetlights. Wind pushed rain sideways across the pavement. As she stepped outside, her phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "Stop attending the meetings." The message contained no signature, no explanation, just 7 words. Tessa stared at it, her stomach tightened immediately. Another vibration followed seconds later. "This neighborhood cannot be saved." She stopped walking. Rain tapped against her coat. Charlie pressed against her leg. A cold feeling settled deep inside her chest. The messages felt different from the photograph weeks earlier. The photograph had been a warning. This felt personal, intentional. She looked around the empty street. Nobody appeared nearby. Traffic rolled past at a distance. Everything seemed ordinary, yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. By the time she reached her apartment building, another message had arrived. "Leave before you lose more than property." Tessa locked her phone and stood motionless in the lobby. For the first time since the redevelopment project began, genuine fear crept into her thoughts. Someone knew who she was. Someone knew where she lived. Someone wanted her gone. Less than a mile away, Raphael Marino sat inside a conference room overlooking Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline beneath the storm. Several documents lay spread across the table: financial reports, property acquisitions, internal communications. Information most people would never see. One page contained a list of community organizers opposing the redevelopment project. Tessa Morgan's name appeared near the top. Raphael's expression hardened as he read. The timing was no coincidence. Opposition had become inconvenient, and inconvenience often attracted attention. His phone rang. A brief conversation followed, then another. By the end of the second call, he was already standing. Back in Brooklyn, Tessa spent the evening trying to convince herself she was overreacting. Anonymous messages happened all the time. People said foolish things online. Fear made everything seem larger than it was. Around 9 o'clock, she finally took Charlie outside for a quick walk. Rain had eased into a light drizzle. The streets were nearly empty. They reached the corner of her block when Charlie suddenly stopped, completely stopped. His ears lifted. His body became rigid. Tessa followed his gaze. A dark sedan sat parked across the street with its headlights off. The vehicle had not been there earlier. Something about it felt wrong. Before she could decide why, another car appeared from the opposite direction. A familiar black sedan. It pulled sharply to the curb beside her. The passenger window lowered inside. "Get in." Tessa blinked. "What now?" His voice carried an urgency she had never heard before. Every instinct told her something had changed. She glanced back toward the parked sedan. Its engine suddenly started, and for the first time since she met Raphael Marino, she saw genuine concern in his eyes. Fear loses some of its power the moment someone stands beside you. Rain streaked across the windshield as Tessa climbed into the sedan with Charlie. The door closed behind her with a muted thud. Outside, the other vehicle remained parked across the street. Inside, silence filled the space between her and Raphael. "Tell me what is happening," she said. Raphael looked through the windshield for a moment before answering. "The people behind the redevelopment project have started making mistakes. Anonymous messages are mistakes?" "No." His expression hardened. "They are a sign that someone is running out of patience." The driver pulled away from the curb. Within seconds, the sedan disappeared into the wet maze of Brooklyn streets. Tessa glanced back through the rear window. The other vehicle remained where it was. "Were they following me?" she asked. Raphael did not answer immediately. "They were paying attention to you." Somehow that felt worse. 20 minutes later, they arrived at a quiet office building overlooking the East River. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a skyline blurred by rain. The space felt more like a private research center than a business office. Monitors displayed maps, documents, and financial records. Several people worked quietly behind glass walls. Nobody seemed surprised to see Raphael. A few nodded respectfully. Tessa looked around in disbelief. "What is this place?" "Information," Raphael replied. "Most problems become easier when you understand them." Charlie immediately claimed a spot near one of the windows and settled down. Tessa remained standing. "You still have not told me why I am here." Raphael walked toward a conference table. Several folders waited there. He opened one and slid a document across the surface. Tessa read the first page, then the second, then the third. Her stomach tightened with every line: internal communications, property acquisition plans, financial transfers. Several names repeated throughout the documents, including the same development company representative who attended the community meetings. "These are real?" she asked quietly. "Yes, they planned this from the beginning." Raphael nodded. "The public meetings were never about community input." Tessa stared at the pages. "Then why has nobody stopped them?" "Because nobody had enough evidence." He slid another folder toward her. "Until now." For the next hour, Raphael showed her documents connecting shell companies, hidden investors, and coordinated efforts to pressure residents into leaving voluntarily. No dramatic conspiracy, no unbelievable scheme, just money, influence, and people who assumed nobody would look closely enough. By the end, Tessa understood why Raphael had been watching the neighborhood so carefully. This was never just about property. It was about people, families, businesses, entire lives. "You could expose all of this," she said. "I intend to." The answer came without hesitation. Tessa looked at him carefully. "Why?" Raphael glanced toward the rain-soaked skyline beyond the windows. "Because some places deserve to survive." The simplicity of the answer struck her harder than any speech could have. Hours later, the rain finally stopped. City lights reflected across the river like scattered stars. For the first time in weeks, Tessa felt something she had nearly lost. Hope, real hope. As she prepared to leave, Raphael handed her a small envelope. "What is this?" she asked. "Insurance." Inside was a secure contact number, nothing more. "If anything feels wrong," he said, "call immediately." Their eyes met. Neither looked away. The distance between them had almost disappeared now, not because the mystery was gone, because trust had begun replacing it. Unfortunately, trust was not the only thing growing. Across the city, several executives connected to the redevelopment project had just learned that critical documents were missing, and when they traced the leak back to Brooklyn, one name appeared repeatedly in their reports. Not Raphael Marino, Tessa Morgan. Sometimes the hardest battle is not exposing the truth. Sometimes it is believing that the truth can actually change something. The following week transformed the neighborhood. News outlets began publishing reports connected to the leaked documents. Investigations followed. Public officials who once praised the redevelopment project suddenly stopped giving interviews. Community meetings overflowed with residents. Questions replaced promises. Accountability replaced confidence. For the first time since the project began, people felt like they were being heard. Tessa watched it unfold with cautious optimism. She wanted to believe the worst was over, yet experience had taught her that change rarely arrived without resistance. One cold morning, she stood outside the library, watching volunteers organize petitions and information tables along the sidewalk. Charlie rested beside her, happily accepting attention from anyone willing to scratch behind his ears. The neighborhood felt alive again. Hope moved through the streets like sunlight after a long winter. Her phone vibrated. A meet me at the waterfront, 6 o'clock. As evening settled over the city, she found him standing near the East River. The skyline glowed across dark water. Ferries moved through the distance like floating lanterns. A sharp wind carried the scent of salt and steel. Raphael stood with his hands in his coat pockets, watching the lights reflect across the river. For a moment neither spoke. The silence felt familiar now, comfortable. "The city looks different tonight," Tessa finally said. "No," Raphael replied quietly. "You do." She laughed softly. That was unexpectedly smooth. A faint smile appeared. "I will try not to make a habit of it." They walked slowly along the waterfront. Behind them, traffic hummed across the city. Ahead of them, the river stretched into darkness. "The investigation is growing," Tessa said. "People are talking about criminal charges." Raphael nodded. "The evidence is stronger than they expected." "You sound surprisingly calm, because this stopped being about winning weeks ago." She glanced toward him. "Then what is it about?" Raphael looked out over the water before answering. "Making sure the people who belong here get to stay." The answer did not surprise her anymore. Months ago she would have assumed everything about him revolved around power. Now she knew better, beneath the influence, beneath the reputation. Beneath every carefully constructed wall stood someone still protecting the neighborhood where his sister once laughed. They reached the end of the pier and stopped. Wind tugged at Tessa's hair. Charlie settled near their feet. The city lights reflected in Raphael's eyes. For a long moment neither looked away. "I owe you an apology," Tessa said quietly. "For what?" "For assuming the worst about you." Raphael's expression softened. That was not entirely unreasonable. "Maybe not," she smiled. But it was still wrong. The distance between them felt smaller than ever. Not because of attraction alone, because of trust, the kind that formed slowly. One choice at a time, one truth at a time. Raphael looked toward Charlie. "You know, if you had walked past him that night, none of this would have happened." The dog wagged his tail, as if completely unaware he had altered multiple lives. "I almost did," she admitted. Raphael looked at her. "No." She frowned. "What? You were never going to walk away?" The certainty in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment neither spoke. The wind moved across the river. The city shimmered beyond them. Then Raphael took a slow breath. "Tessa." The way he said her name immediately changed something. "What?" she asked softly. His gaze never left hers. "Before all of this ends, there is something I should have said a long time ago. The people who change our lives rarely arrive the way we expect. Sometimes they arrive carrying grief. Sometimes they arrive carrying hope, and sometimes they arrive carrying a frightened dog through a snowstorm." The wind moved gently across the river as Raphael stood beside Tessa beneath the glow of city lights. For a moment, the world seemed unusually quiet. The investigations were still ongoing. News reports continued growing. Yet none of it felt important right now. Tessa looked at him and waited. Raphael rarely struggled to find words. Tonight was different. "I spent years trying to control everything," he said quietly. "Every situation, every outcome, every risk." His gaze shifted briefly toward the dark water. "Then one night I saw someone sitting in the snow giving away her dinner to a stray dog." Tessa smiled softly. He kept walking. "Most people are smarter than me." Raphael laughed, a genuine laugh, rare and unguarded. Then his expression softened again. "No, they are not." The city lights shimmered behind them. Charlie rested nearby, perfectly content. "After Sophia died, I convinced myself that caring too much only led to loss," Raphael continued. "Then you reminded me of her." Tessa looked down briefly, not because she was uncomfortable, because she understood how much it cost him to say it. "That is why you followed me." Raphael nodded. "At first the honesty mattered, and later," she asked quietly. His eyes met hers. "Later, I was following the person who brought something back into my life that I thought was gone forever." The answer settled gently between them. No dramatic declaration, no perfect speech, just truth. Sometimes truth carried more weight than anything else. Months passed. Winter slowly surrendered to spring. The investigation concluded with public hearings, financial penalties, and cancelled redevelopment contracts. The neighborhood survived. Families stayed in their homes. Small businesses remained open. The library remained exactly where it belonged. People celebrated in ways both large and small. A repaired storefront, a reopened community garden, children returning to playgrounds that no longer faced demolition, life continuing. One bright afternoon in April, the entire neighborhood gathered for a community event in the park. Local musicians played beneath flowering trees. Volunteers handed out flyers announcing new preservation initiatives. For the first time in a very long time, people looked hopeful. Tessa stood near the library booth, greeting residents she had known for years. Charlie moved happily between groups of children, receiving far more attention than he knew what to do with. Across the park, Raphael spoke with several community leaders. The distance between the two of them lasted less than a minute before his eyes found hers. It always happened that way now. Weeks later, beneath clear spring skies, they returned to the same waterfront where everything had finally become honest between them. This time there were no investigations, no warnings, no secrets. Raphael held a small velvet box in his hand. Tessa immediately laughed. "You really chose the most intimidating presentation possible. I had a reputation to maintain." "Had?" Raphael smiled. Past tense. The ring itself mattered less than the question, and the question mattered less than everything that led to it. She said yes before he finished asking. "Because some decisions become obvious long before they are spoken aloud." On the first warm Saturday of May, they returned to the park where Sophia once sat beside Charlie. The same weathered stone bench remained beneath the old maple tree. Children played nearby. Birds filled the air with song. Spring covered every branch in fresh green leaves. Tessa sat beside Raphael while Charlie raced across open grass, chasing absolutely nothing. For a while neither spoke, they simply watched. The sunlight felt warm, the future felt open. The loneliness that once followed Raphael everywhere had finally disappeared, and the woman who always carried the world alone no longer had to. Charlie eventually returned and collapsed happily at their feet. Tessa leaned gently against Raphael's shoulder. Across the park, laughter echoed through the afternoon air. Months earlier, everything had begun with snow, silence, and a dog nobody wanted. Now it ended with sunlight, family, and a life neither of them had expected to find, because sometimes the smallest act of kindness does not just save a life. Sometimes it leads two lost people home.